and I am in the kitchen. We are also in a series called God Help Me. Last week we talked about God help me with my critical spirit, and this week we're talking about God help me have a contented life. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, God help me, Christy's in the kitchen. No, that's not what you're thinking. Hey, no, we're going to talk about food today. We're going to talk about some of your favorite foods. We're going to talk about a secret recipe that Paul tells us about. We'll learn more about that, the secret recipe to a contented life. But before we get to that, let's play a game of Would You Rather Food Edition. Hey, we're going to play a video real quick and just shout out what you would rather between a couple of choices of food. Now, there's no right or wrong answer, so I can't wait to hear where you people stand. Let's go. Let's play Would You Rather. So how did you guys do with those would you rather questions? Now, if you were one of those people that said they like mayo at every meal, you are not my people. Oh my goodness. Well, that's not the only fun part. The fun part about the would you rather questions is that I suspect if we got our wish and only ever had cake, we would still not be content. Because we humans, we don't seem to be wired that way. In fact, contentment is something that has to be learned. Now this week, the Apostle Paul caught my attention about contentment. You see, Paul says in Philippians 4:12 that he has learned the recipe for contentment. Well, so two things jumped out at me at first. First, Paul had to learn to be content, and that's good news for me because that means that I can learn to be content. The second thing Paul said is that he had a recipe. And when y'all know, we all love a good recipe, the inside track, that pro tip. So Paul had me hooked. Paul said that the secret recipe, here comes the wisdom he drops, is realizing that you already have what you need to be content. When you learn that God created you, made a plan for you, has given you a kingdom assignment that only you can serve out, you get filled with gratitude for what you have and what has happened to you. And when you're filled with gratitude, you are filled with contentment. So let me put this, Paul's words, in terms of something that I love. Meatloaf. I have this meatloaf recipe. It's delicious. I've been making it for years. And, people even go back for seconds for this recipe. And that was great. I love this recipe until the day that I had my friend Vicky's meatloaf. Vicky's meatloaf was delicious. After I tried that, I started thinking things like, I wonder what Vicky puts in her meatloaf. I wonder if I can get Vicky's recipe. I suddenly became discontent with my meatloaf recipe. And I wanted to get my hands on Vicky's meatloaf recipe. Now I was wanting Vicky's meatloaf recipe all the time. I was starting to feel a little envious of Vicky's meatloaf recipe. And I started comparing her recipe to my recipe. All right, let's get back to Paul, what Paul said about this problem. Paul drops this wisdom while he's in prison. Paul says, I have learned by now to be quite content no matter what because of God. See, folks, Paul said that when you learn that God made you to be you and that God has a plan for your life and that that plan is a path that leads you to Him and contentment, that's the secret ingredient. So if Paul were hanging out right here in the kitchen with me, he'd probably be saying a couple of things to me about my meatloaf problem. First thing he'd say would be, stop comparing yourself to others. Don't compare your meatloaf to Vicky's, get over it. The second thing he would say was, enjoy what you do have. Be thankful you have a kitchen and that you have ingredients to make meatloaf. He would probably tell me that life's not all about meatloaf and that I need to focus on what's forever. Meatloaf is not forever, but Jesus is. So where I got into trouble and where we get into trouble is when we start thinking that things would be better if, that my meatloaf would be better if I had Vicky's recipe. Oh, my life would be better if I had a promotion at job. Oh, if I could only make it onto that team, then I'll be set. Oh, if these were my friends, then my social life would improve. If we start thinking if, it destroys our contentment. But if we could learn what Paul learned, then we could be living a contented life. If we learn that God created us and we only have our path, and that's the only path we need to follow, then we get off of that comparison train. So here's my challenge for you this week. Try Paul's secret recipe for living a contented life. If you start thinking if something, flip it around and remember that God made you and He has a special kingdom assignment designed just for you. And also, let me know if you get Vicky's meatloaf recipe. I'd really like to have it. You guys have a great week. I'll see you soon.